Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and we begin tonight with a request for forgiveness. It's coming from The Atlantic. It's one of those journals that only the smart set intellectuals, liberals read. Nah, that's not true. Some conservatives like to read it too, so they can be thoughtful and say, that was an important piece. It was written by Emily Oster, and it asked for a COVID-19 pandemic amnesty. Hey, look, we were all just operating in the fog of war. We didn't have a whole lot of facts at our disposal, and mistakes were made. Let's just move on now, shall we? Are they asking us to forgive and forget, or just forget? Listen, forgiveness is an important, virtuous thing, and I do agree that we as a society, how we relate to each other, and certainly how we relate to our God, we have to have forgiveness as part of the equation there. And speaking of God, he sort of laid out provisions for how repentance and forgiveness should play out. You acknowledge the thing that you did wrong. You approach the person that you harmed and you ask them for forgiveness. You recognize that you harmed them and actually try to make it better by fixing what you broke, and then you promise not to do it again. I just didn't see all of those details in this article in The Atlantic, but we've all shared it on our Facebook and Twitter pages, and we've talked about it on Broadcast Network News, and we've said this is a very important article, and we should all take this under consideration. It is time to move on. Not so fast. Let's go through this forgiveness protocol by first detailing exactly what went wrong here. Let's start with our schools. As schools were shut down in mid-March of 2020, students were told that they'll be just fine. They're resilient. Kids will persevere, we were told. So they can go ahead and do their first grade reading lessons on a laptop on your kitchen table because, first graders, they'll stay transfixed to a laptop where a teacher is talking in their kitchen for the next 6 hours a day. It's like these teachers and educators have never met a child before in their life. But it was the fog of war. We didn't know. We were trying to protect children. We didn't want them to die from COVID-19. By late May of 2020, just 2 months into this thing, we had the facts. We knew that children weren't susceptible to this virus. We knew from studies in Sweden and in Germany that not only were they not affected by this virus if they contracted it in any severe way, but they also weren't passing it on to people in their families. But boy, we kept those schools closed, didn't we? And if we dared to object, if we dared to say, hey, this is really bad for our kids, let's try to make this work. I mean, I can go to the Home Depot and buy lumber. I can go to the bar and buy a shot of tequila. I can go to a strip club, not that I ever would, but somehow we can't figure out how to get our kids in the classroom. Figure it out, we said. And the response was, shut up. The response was, you're killing your kid's third grade teacher by even saying such things. Why do you have such a death cult, we were told. All the while, the people who were yelling at us were keeping their kids in private school. Oh yeah, that's right. All the science and murky nature of the data regarding COVID-19, somehow we did figure one thing out, that if you're paying tens of thousands of dollars to a private school, your kids will be immune and they won't catch the virus. But if you're in a public school, which also coincidentally happens to be controlled by the very powerful teachers union, then your kid is going to get sick and kill grandma. Now, again, none of this showed up in Emily Oster's very thoughtful column in The Atlantic asking for forgiveness. No, actually demanding forgiveness. Maybe we lay out some of the other things that were done to us and to our children, like gatherings that we weren't allowed to go to. For instance, church. We were told stop worshiping the way you wish. Last I checked, the government isn't allowed to do that to you. We actually had to sue the federal government on a church-by-church basis so that we could get back to worshiping. We couldn't go to funerals. We couldn't go to weddings. We couldn't go to beaches. Remember the guy who would dress up like the Grim Reaper and follow people around on Death Santis's Florida beaches? He was wrong. Is he apologizing? Is he recognizing that he did things wrong? Oh, and don't forget the first week of June, all of the Black Lives Matters protests that happened in Washington, D.C., and New York, and Chicago, and Baltimore, and Los Angeles, and probably your city as well. Those were okay. Those public gatherings were fine. You can't go and kneel in a pew and worship your God. But if you're marching on the streets screaming for the defunding of police, you're safe. No problem. Businesses were shut down. People were left in economic peril. There was an uptick in suicides. There was an uptick in overdoses. There was an uptick in cancer because people were afraid to go to the hospital, get themselves checked out. I didn't see any of this in Emily Oster's article demanding forgiveness. There were people who were removed from organ transplant lists because they didn't want to get the COVID-19 vaccine. They were dying and ready to get a liver transplant or a kidney transplant. And the medical industry removed them from the transplant list that would save their lives because they refused to get a vaccine that would not protect them from infection of this virus. There are people who lost their jobs and their livelihoods because they didn't want to get that COVID-19 vaccine. And there were people who were demonized, screamed at, called anti-vaxxers, called science deniers because they didn't want to get that COVID-19 vaccine. Have you seen that the new head of the CDC, Rochelle Walensky, the director of the CDC, she has COVID again for the second time. It's a recurrence. She just had it about a month ago, and now she has it again. This is after being double vaccinated and triple boosted. She kept her job. Oh, and that's another thing. You want forgiveness for all of the mistakes that were made? Maybe, but let's start with making amends. Like, how about all those people getting their jobs back if they didn't want to get the vaccine? And how about you stepping down from your job? Oh yeah, that's right. You see, in Japan, people have honor. When an elected official makes a mistake and ruins people's lives, they actually step down and resign. They're humiliated publicly. Where's the humiliation here? Think of every single politician that grandstanded behind a podium and preened about how they were the ones who were following the science, that they were the ones who were trying to save lives, that they were pushing back against the science deniers who wanted to ruin this country. They're still there. All the people who made those mistakes that we're now being asked to forgive are still in power. Many of them still have emergency protocols under the guise of the COVID-19 health emergency. You want forgiveness? Admit what you did, admit you were wrong, apologize, and then get out of the way so that you can't do it again. Then maybe we can be on the path of reconciliation. Then maybe we can start to restore things in this country. Now, I'm not stupid and I'm not naive, and I know that none of that is going to happen. So, how do we move from here? How do we forgive and forget? How do we actually reconcile? We're 7 days away. We will vote and we will remove them from office. If you're wondering who you should vote for coming up next Tuesday, if you're still torn about, Oz or Fetterman or Ryan or Vance, and you're not sure exactly who the best person is to be the governor of Arizona, just think of one thing in your mind. Which one of these candidates would govern me more like Ron DeSantis in Florida, who doesn't have to ask anyone for forgiveness today? Think about that, and then I think we're on the road to reconciliation.